Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk4705. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we're back with Punk4705 with two addies, thin mohawk and small shades. In real life, he is one of the mature and credible voices in Web3, always at the cutting edge of culture and technology, with holding senior leadership roles across global iconic cultural fashion and music brands such as LVMH, Winamp, Yahoo, and Apple Music. He currently serves as Ledger's Chief Experience Officer. Please welcome Ian Rogers to the show. Ian, how are you?
Thank you. I'm great, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
No, likewise.
It's an honor to be in the CryptoPunk community.
I think we could likewise say the same. I think we need high-profile people that can help elevate the brand, and delighted to sort of know that there's people like you in here.
Thank you. I always think I'm not sure I'm so high profile. I think I'm just a skateboarder from Indiana, but you know, I've had a nice journey.
Shout out to Lana Moore as well for connecting us, and sort of know that you're on Focus Block curation board as well. So shout out Lana Moore if you're listening.
Shout out. I love photography. I love people bringing photos on the blockchain. Just I love the art form, and it's where I like to collect, and I like seeing, beautiful works that I love there. So yeah, shout out.
We'll have to sort of definitely delve into that. But I've just been going through Googling your name, and a whole bunch of things that sort of popped up, and sort of excited to have this conversation with you. And obviously, having seen some of the interviews that you've had with Raoul Paul from Real Vision, and the conversations that you've had on your podcast as well, have been super interesting to sort of understand it. But I sort of take that from your sort of background, you've really gone through, I guess, a space of counterculture. I think you mentioned skateboarding was one of them, grown through, Winamp when we were playing illegal music. So that was almost counterculture, and, your involvement with Beastie Boys. And I think, it's all intertwined around culture and counterculture and technology, and multiple threads of that along the way. And so I think this is a really relevant sort of conversation for us to sort of have. But maybe before we get deep into that, maybe if you could just share a little bit about, I guess, your background, where you grew up, what you studied, and everything sort of leading up to before crypto.
Sure. I mean, I'll be short because I think I've said it a lot of times, so I don't want to bore anyone who's already heard me run through this. But at a really high level, like I said, I mean, I grew up in Indiana and I grew up skateboarding, but I really grew up just as a record collector and loving music. I had an older brother who I got all of his hand-me-down records, and that is kind of like the cultural touch point for me. I think, I went on this musical journey, much like, fellow punk Sean Bonner. I think he and I have a really similar background of having this like love of music and love of technology, but also just, being idealistic, searchers in a way, always kind of, looking, what do things really mean, and why are things the way they are? I think, really punk rock isn't necessarily about being rebellious. It's really more about being questioning. And I think that's what I was. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and I didn't feel like the culture there really spoke to me. So, when I opened, a gatefold vinyl, or, an issue of Thrasher or Transworld Skateboarding or Maximum Rock and Roll, I saw a world I want to live in. That more closely, that was just more a world I wanted to live in than the one that I lived in at the time. So the internet for me brought me the same thing. When I got to Indiana University and I got onto Usenet, I'm 51 years old, so that was 1990. I met people who liked the same music as me for the first time, and that was what the internet meant to me, was, finding these people whose tastes reflected mine more closely than what I grew up with in this small town in Indiana where, everyone wanted to play, football or basketball, and like, no offense to those things, but it's not what I wanted to do. The internet to me was about finding those people and those communities. And I just got lucky, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, luck is what you make out of it. I had a kid when I was 17 years old, and I was sort of destined for maybe a trailer park and factory work in northern Indiana. But I had studied computers as a kid, and then when I got to college, I did a year actually of elementary education, and it was my former stepdad who encouraged me to change my major. And even though I knew nothing about like kind of contemporary computers at that point, but I kind of had a knack for it. So he shoved me in that direction, and I fell into it. And then I ended up making the first search and stream system for the Indiana University Music Library. They had this vision that instead of records behind the desk or on the seat, compact discs on the shelf, that they would be at workstations. And I was like, well, you're paying me, so I'm going to build whatever it is you tell me to build. And what I built was, a search and stream system. You'd search the campus card catalog, and then if you found a multimedia record, you could stream it. And like at first, you would literally stream it from the IBM RS-6000 under my desk to the next slab that was on top of my desk. And I ended up making it a web application, even though the web didn't exist for Windows or Mac yet. It only existed for X Windows at the time, but we knew it was coming for Windows and Mac ultimately. My recollection actually is that it came for Mac first, which was interesting. And we were a beta site of that for this team at UIUC, which was like a stone's throw away from us at Indiana University, led by Mark Andreessen, this team of other college students at the time. But my reasoning was only that I didn't want to write any Windows applications. I didn't want to write in Hungarian notation. I wanted to keep writing on I wanted to keep writing in Objective-C on Next Step, but I knew there was this thing called the web, and if I ported it to the quote unquote web, then I wouldn't have to write it for Windows. So that was how I got kind of pulled into it. But then I started, making these new things called websites. The Indiana University Music Library website was the second ever music related website. I mean, you can't imagine what a ghost town it was. Like people talk about how few people are in NFTs today. Like, you should have seen the World Wide Web in 1993, right? There were fewer people, if you can imagine. But also similarly, we didn't have any opportunistic vision. We were just like using new technologies to try to solve a problem. I wanted to, I used to post the Beastie Boys FAQ on Usenet once every 2 weeks. Well, look, I can put it on this thing called the website now and just post a URL, and everybody can just go there, and they can go there anytime. They don't have to wait for me to post it. And then I just, I'm an obsessive person, so I had to make it, insanely complete with all the lyrics and every magazine article they'd ever been in, and every video. I mean, this was like, we're talking like little QuickTime video squares in 1994. And I won't bore you with the long story because I ended up getting a call from the Beastie Boys. I can't remember anymore. I never know. What I know is I met them for the first time in person the summer of 94. So did they call me in late 93 or early 94? I don't know. But summer of 94, Lollapalooza is when I first met them. And then ended up, dropping out of grad school in 1995 to go on tour with them, and ended up in California and, living in Mike D's house while I found an apartment. And that's been a super long road for me. I mean, ultimately it did introduce me to a life, to be honest with you, but also think people like Sean Bonner, who I met through Glennie Friedman, who I met through the Beastie Boys, Christmas of 94. But that's been the journey for me. I then, it was like Groundhog Day from that original search and stream system. I joined a very small team called Nullsoft that made Winamp in the end of, I guess it was the end of 97, beginning of 98. We sold Nullsoft to AOL in May of 95. Tried to do Grand Royal Records with the Beastie Boys, but we went bankrupt. So Rob Lord and I started another kind of web-based version of Winamp. The product was called Muse.net. The company was called Media Code. Sold that to Yahoo in December of 2003. Worked at Yahoo Music for a while with a great team led by a guy named Dave Goldberg. And then when Dave left Yahoo, took over Yahoo Music. And then pulled out by Shamal Ranasinghe, who has done some really great stuff in music over the years, along with a guy named Peter Gocher, who invented Pro Tools and created Digidesign. Once upon a time, we did a startup called Topspin together. That was a commercial failure, but I think an idealistic success or an ideology success. I am sorry to my investors because I lost their money, but I took a lot from that experience. I mean, both in terms of lessons, but also I use the ideology from Topspin, every day of my life. It was really like the direct to consumer ethos that I took with me to LVMH and that I use. I mean, certainly in the world of NFTs, but also at Ledger was a lot of the ideas that we really thought about in those days. In between, Jimmy Iovine recruited me and Luke Wood recruited me to do Beats Music with Trent Reznor was from Nine Inch Nails was the creative director. Dr. Dre was Dr. Dre, and we built Beats Music and sold that Beats and Apple to Apple, and then built Apple Music with Jimmy and Trent and Zane Lowe, who are just like geniuses that I was very lucky to be in business with. And then I got recruited to come here to Paris and be the chief digital officer at a luxury conglomerate called LVMH. LVMH, I didn't know who they were when they called me, but if you're in the fashion business, you certainly know who they are. But the brands. Everybody knows the brands: Louis Vuitton, Dior, Celine, Sephora, Hennessy, Dom Perignon, etc. And I mean, I was so lucky. I mean, they're just great people, and I feel really fortunate to have had the time to learn from them. But also, it's incredible to be a part of a business which is their entire investment thesis is about supporting creativity with operational efficiency. And I think it's hard for people on the outside to believe that that's real, but it is. I mean, they believe very deeply in creativity. And I say that coming from the music business, where what I saw in the fashion business is that they actually give artists much more time and much more oxygen to build and to grow than the music business does, right? The music business is like, come on in, if you have a hit, we'll keep going with you. And if you don't, we'll move on to the next. Whereas, the fashion business, I've watched them support, many, many young designers and, really push them to become, who they are, which takes years. It takes years for creativity to develop and a lot of support, for it to have wings and to watch a company which is commercially successful at doing that at that scale is super exciting. And I think that really plays in all the way from, small galleries up to big brands like Louis Vuitton. It's a model that does, it can be very small and it also can be very big. When it's very big, it takes a long time and it happens organically. But I love this space. I love being able to have the same conversations that I have with someone like Derek Edward Schloss with someone like Bernard Arnault, where what we're talking about is, the value of creativity. And, we've had this conversation where, from my perspective, the value of a CryptoPunk is aligned with the value of a Basquiat. Not to say that they have similar value, but they each have value for the same reason, right? Basquiat has value because every year more people know the story and there's no more supply. And, if 25 years from now, CryptoPunks have value, it will be for exactly the same reason. So, to ask yourself, should I buy a CryptoPunk? You only need to ask yourself one question, which is, do I think in 25 years people will still talk about these things? If yes, then you should. If no, then you shouldn't. It's that simple. And then time will tell, who's right and who's wrong. But the point is that the value comes from exactly the same thing. We always said at LVMH, or I always said at least, that storytelling equals value. Or a better way to put it is maybe storytelling equals margin. Nobody buys a Dior handbag for its incredible utility. I've said many times, right? People, why would you spend $3,000 on a handbag, right? It's not because of its 5-star reviews on Amazon, right? You do it because it means something in culture and you want to express that something. So then to come all the way back to the beginning of the story, that makes perfect sense to me. Why did I wear, a Christian Hosoi skateboard t-shirt, in the 80s? for exactly the same reason. So that, when I'm at the mall, I'm that skateboard kid. I'm not that football kid. Right. It's a Louis Vuitton handbag and a Slayer t-shirt have the exact same purpose in society. So I've been able to dance around that for a long time. I love it. It's what I love, thinking about. It's why I have tattoos. It's, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it with pride. I'm saying it just simply because it is. So that's where I come from. And I think there is definitely some machine where if you go into the machine as a record collector and a geek, then in 2023 you come out a NFT collector and a CryptoPunk owner. So here I am.
Here you are. Wow. What sort of amazing and colorful sort of background you just described there. Just picking up on a couple points as well. I think you mentioned you connected with Sean Bonner. So obviously I've had him on PunkCast before, and he's got such a fascinating story and sort of deep into the space early into the tech scene as well. Like, how did you meet Sean, and when was that? Just out of curiosity.
It's funny because we met not through technology at all. I guess on some level we did because, I think really we met because we have a lot of shared interests and just the very simple fact that we have one shared friend. Glenn Friedman, who I mentioned, Glennie Friedman is, really he's one of the greatest photographers of our lifetimes. And he was there at these seminal moments in history. He shot a lot of the original photos of Dogtown and the Z-Boys. If you watch that documentary, many of those photographs are his. The rest are Craig Stessick's. The early days of punk rock, he was there shooting Minor Threat, Black Flag, everybody, on and on. If you pick up his books, there's the original Fuck You Heroes books. There's another book called My Rules, which is, I think, his kind of biggest kind of compendium that he's done. But he's just done a Black Flag book. He's finishing a Minor Threat book. I was in a punk rock band in high school that basically did Minor Threat and Black Flag covers. So, for me, and I met him through the Beastie Boys. Glenn and I met at Mike D's house one Christmas holiday. I don't think it was Christmas Day, but Glenn and I were just talking about this, how like what we remember about that was that I showed him a CD-ROM encyclopedia for the first time, and I'm pretty sure we looked at Myst. If anybody remembers the CD-ROM game Myst. But somehow through the art scene, he got connected with Sean as well, and it was just one of those things where I know to me, Glenn was always like, "You got to meet my friend Sean," and I'm sure it was the same for Sean, and over time and we did manage to get connected. So it's one of those things where like seeing Sean in the space was like, "Oh, of course you're here. Of course you are." Mike Shinoda said the same thing to me, like, when he started, I don't know, maybe he doesn't feel this way anymore, but when he first started getting into NFTs, he looked around and was like, "Oh, Ian's here. Okay, it must be okay to be here then." But I think that's, we've kind of floated around. There are a lot of us that maybe not a lot of us, but there are a few of us that keep bumping into each other because, we're interested in the same sorts of frontiers, if you know what I mean, right? The same things that our ancestors were doing, 300 years ago, coming to the US. My mom did our lineage and found out that one of her ancestors was married to someone who came over on the Mayflower. I was like, that makes sense. Because those people were fucking crazy. They were totally nuts. And I feel the same way. I was with Gary Vee 2 summers ago at like above VCon. We're like looking out over an arena with like 10,000 people in it, all of whom, own V friends. And I said to Gary, I said, "Do you feel like you're bringing people to the United States 300 years ago?" Because it's undoubtedly, unquestionably the land of opportunity. And also a lot of them are going to die. Right. So I think that's what it means to be a pioneer and to be on the frontier. You're out there pushing forward because you believe, you're not doing it to, have the masses pat you on the back. If that's what I wanted, I would have, tried to be Larry Bird.
When did you get introduced to crypto, or when did you get red pilled and, started going deep into it?
I got introduced to crypto. I got introduced to Bitcoin very early by a guy named Parker Brooks, who until recently was working on NFT things here at Ledger with us. I worked with Parker at Topspin and again at Beats and at Apple. And then he came with me here to Beats to work on, to Ledger to work on NFT things. But we were at Topspin. It would have been 2009 or 2010. So like right away, like very white paper era, like, and Parker's that guy. He's like, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. And for me, and I'm enough of a nerd that I dove in and I looked at it. And my original assessment of Bitcoin was, this threatens state sovereignty and therefore will not be allowed to live. And my context for that was, at Winamp, we had created Gnutella, which was the first kind of true peer-to-peer software, right? So Gnutella came in the wake of Napster. Napster was being sued by the RIAA. I was the person that called the RIAA and said, have you seen this Napster thing? Not because I wanted to blow the whistle on them, but because, we were making Winamp. And I was like, look, if free music is going to be allowed, then we're going to crush this, So like, tell us what you're going to do with this thing. And they were like, oh, we've never seen it before. Let us call you back. And then the RIAA was suing Napster. And we were just like, what are you doing? This is like suing TCP IP. Like, this toothpaste doesn't go back in the tube. I was asking the record labels to license MP3s. I had a community of people who loved MP3s. We had like 30 million monthly uniques on Winamp in 1998, 99. That's a lot of people in those days on the internet. I mean, we had like the entire internet was listening to music on Winamp. So I said, why don't we sell MP3s to these people? And they said, first of all, what's an MP3? And second of all, once they understood, like, absolutely fuck no, we're going to sell compact discs forever. Right. And so Justin Frankel's response was to make Gnutella. The story is a little longer than that, actually, because we tried to do something else at AOL, but AOL wouldn't give us servers. So Justin, who's, one of the greatest engineers I've ever worked with, said, okay, well, we just solved this problem. Like, you don't need this server that Napster has in the middle. Like, let's just make it truly peer-to-peer. And we don't need these servers that AOL won't give us. We'll just make it truly peer-to-peer. Well, that was like touching the third rail. He released it on the beta list, the original Gnutella code. We worked at AOL at the time. AOL was trying to merge with Time Warner, and they were like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're like releasing like the atomic bomb of copyright infringement while you work at AOL. Like, what is wrong with you? And so Justin put an open source license on it and just sent it out into the wilderness. And you can read all this on the Wikipedia page as well. And we really weren't allowed to touch it. Justin then worked on a private P2P network called Waste, which was kind of even more amazing. But Gnutella had a life of its own as the protocol that underlaid things like BearShare, LimeWire, Kazaa, et cetera. And so this was my point. So when I saw Bitcoin and I went, wait a minute, this threatens state sovereignty, right? And my experience with Gnutella, which was just a protocol, right? You can't stop Gnutella. You can't, just like Bitcoin, it's just a technology and it's unstoppable. But what can you do? You can stop companies that deal in this protocol, right? So they did successfully shut down Kazaa, BearShare, LimeWire, et cetera, right? So that was kind of my initial take on Bitcoin was, this is genius, but governments can make it so that they can't shut the protocol down. So again, that's like stopping TCP/IP, but they can kind of exclude businesses from dealing in it. Right. So I sort of like looked at it and thought it was interesting. At some point, it was later, and it was before I actually owned any Bitcoin, I think. I bought the O'Reilly book, the like programming, Bitcoin. So I'm going to put this on a timeline. And then I think I first bought Bitcoin around 2014. And at that point, I was like, it's gotten big enough that I think the game theory has arrived. I didn't think it would get big enough that the game theory would come in, where the market cap was big enough that, if one country said no to it, another one would say yes to it, right? That was what I saw. So I bought a bit. I then bought some Ethereum in maybe 2015. Yeah, 2015, 2016. And then in 2017, when things were bananas, I sold my cost basis because I was like, this smells like .com madness. And I know where that goes. And I think this is nonsense. And I called the top just by accident, just because like I heard so much shit that made no sense that I was like, this sounds like 1999 to me, and I have no idea. And so I'm selling my cost basis, and now I don't give a fuck, right? So now I'm out, but I'm still in a little bit because I was up a multiple, and I'll just let that ride. But I'll take out my cost basis, and let's see what happens, right? So another thing that happened to me, I moved here in 2015, and I one of the first people I met was Pascal Gauthier. And Pascal's currently the CEO at Ledger. At the time, he was the first seed investor in Ledger and a board member. He became the president and then the CEO, and he and I were just friends. We hang out together, go get drinks together. Our families became friends. We'd go skiing together. Well, he would ski, I would snowboard. And, I love the guy. And through that, I would say that's where kind of my proper orange pilling came, right? Because before I was like a tech guy that was dabbling, right? And then with Pascal, it was like, okay, now I understand the fundamentals much more, right? He gave me kind of my, Bitcoin standard education, if that, if it makes sense. I didn't read the Bitcoin standard until 2020, I think, but between 2015 and 2020, I had the gist of it from Pascal. Then the other thing that happened to me, I was working at LVMH, but also when I moved here to Paris, one of the first people I met was Tony Fadell, who was the inventor of the iPod. You can read about listen to my relationship with Tony Fadell. We did a podcast. I did a podcast with Pascal as well on the Ledger podcast, if you kind of want more of those relationships. But during COVID, Tony's family and my family were pod families, like we didn't see other families, but we saw each other. And, Tony and I are both geeks, and we just kind of wound ourselves up. We're like, what is going on, right? There's, $2 trillion in stimulus in the US, $1 trillion in stimulus in Europe. The technology is here. The world, we're all moving online in terms of our lifestyle. We're watching our kids go to school on Zoom. So of course digital money takes off, and so 2020 is where I kind of went all in. I was like, and I went all in, like with sort of, my own investment strategies. But also, I left LVMH and came to Ledger. So the summer of 2020, Pascal had been trying to get me to come to Ledger since 2018. In the summer of 2020, I was like, all right, let's do this. What are we doing? And I had to find my way out of LVMH, which was really, it was difficult because I love working there and I love the people, but also it's been nice because I still work with them. I still consult with them and stay friendly with them. So that was kind of the journey for me to that. And it wasn't really until I was here, I really didn't anticipate, I did not come to Ledger for NFTs. I collected my first NFT, which was a Winamp NFT, after I got here to Ledger. And then I was like, this is hilarious. I'm now like meeting, I'm somehow still in the fashion business. I'm somehow still in the music business. So in 1994 is when I met the Beastie Boys manager, John Silva. It's objectively the greatest modern music manager. And I think a lot of people in the music business would tell you that. The beginning of 2021, or maybe summer of 2021, he and I took a walk and talked about NFTs. And I was like, John, this is the same conversation we had in 1994. There's this new technology. It's going to impact your business. And we're just talking about how do you do shit that's cool instead of shit that's lame. That's it. It's the same conversation. So anyway, that's the kind of my journey down the rabbit hole.
Gotcha. Just out of curiosity as well, like, I used to love Winamp, downloading MP3s and playing on it. So played a big part of my sort of upbringing as well. But when you said there was a Winamp NFT, like, are they still around? Like, what's going on with Winamp? Or
well, no. So the Winamp NFT is actually an artist. It's a French artist named Julien Rivoire. So there's a great collector, Gaspard, who works with us here at Ledger, and he's the one that turned me on to it. He sent it to me and was like, "Ian, I think you need this one." And I already was like an NFT believer at that point, but I just didn't know where my entry point was. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like, I don't know. I buy this, I get it, but I don't, it's like, I'm not the person that, I mean, put it this way, I hate most music, right? I would say people would describe me as a music fan, but the reality is that, 99% of music is garbage and I don't want to listen to it. And I feel the same way about art, right? I mean, you got to find something that really resonates with you personally. So I actually, had started talking to Gaspar because I believed, and I was like, okay, I actually really wanted his help, in a way, like, I want like someone to help guide me, that friend that turns you on to the good music. Right. I was like, I want someone who really has a good eye to help me with this. And so he's the one that sent me this piece by Julien Rivoire, which was actually, it was like Julien's design of basically if Winamp was a physical player and it kind of folded up and fit in your pocket, what would it look like? It's very cool. If you go to my gallery, which is gallery.so/IANCR, you can see it there. There's actually 2 of Julien's Winamp NFTs there. In terms of what happened to Winamp, like I said, we sold the company to AOL in May of 99. Rob and I stuck around the company a year. Justin stuck around the company a couple more years, I think. Justin ultimately left. And if you want to keep up with Winamp, really the thing to do is to go use Reaper. Reaper.fm is what Justin Frankel has been working on for the latter part of his career. And he's really spent, I don't even know, 20 years on it. And it's basically a Pro Tools replacement that's like $40 shareware made by an absolute genius. So I highly recommend it. Winamp they've tried to resurrect Winamp a couple times, like including recently. It was during lockdown and COVID that somebody made like a Winamp skins museum. And of course, like a bazillion people sent that to me. But Winamp skins are actually a good touch point for me for NFTs because I know there would have been a marketplace for Winamp NFTs if there could have been, I kind of ironically, like Justin and Justin Frankel and Rob Francis, but Rob Lord, they neither of them are pro crypto at all. And I think that's probably putting it mildly. We've had the conversation more than once. At the same time, for me, I just came out with a different take, which is like Winamp skins to me show that, people, of course, they will make a digital commodity because they love making it. But if you layer a marketplace on top, it can go a completely different place. Just like many online marketplaces have shown us, whether it's eBay, on to many other things. And if you talk to, someone like Angelo who made Deviant art, about how Deviant art in the 90s would have been different if you'd have had, kind of different marketplace technology underneath. Like, there's just no question that it would be significantly different. But that's called evolution. That's the way things move.
Gotcha. And when did you discover CryptoPunks? Like, how did you get onto CryptoPunks, and what was that journey like and that process like to getting your first punk?
It's a great question because I don't remember. I think it was sort of a vague thing like that I'd heard, but didn't really, understand deeply. And then you kind of absorb more and more of it as you go further into, I like collecting. I liked collecting on Tezos. I like collecting things that were just cheap and fun, where you build a relationship with an artist over Twitter, right? I like punk rock. I don't like stadium rock, right? So to me, CryptoPunks, by the time I started collecting, were already in that sort of like, stratospheric zone that was reserved for Gary Vee and G Money, right? I wasn't there at the beginning, and I wasn't going to jump in at the top point. And I had a friend who I won't mention, who has money, who, consulted me on buying a punk kind of, around the top of the market. And, I remember what I told him at the time was, he said, "Do you think I should do this?" And I said, "Look, if you're asking me, can I predict the value 20 years from now?" I'm going to say absolutely fuck no, I cannot. Now, if you're asking me, well, do I believe that people will be showing these things in art galleries 50 years from now? I say yes. Right. So that now take with that and do what you want to with that information. But that was my feeling, even though I was kind of priced out. And it was actually, Sean, who helped me sort of find my first punk by putting me in touch with Tony.
Tony Herrera.
Exactly. The legend. I had met Tony. Where did I meet Tony? I think I met Tony for the first time at a party in Minneapolis at that VCon. We met at a party, and I mean, he's a legend, but also just meeting him, like, oh, I know this guy. I lived in LA for 20 years. Like, I know this guy. Like, this is a real guy, and I love that he's in our space. And then Sean pinged me later and was like, hey, Tony might be up for doing a deal, if you want to talk to him. And I was like, I do, because at that point the price had shaved a bit, and I was interested, and I believe, and for me, it was sort of like an easy long-term bet. Like I said, the bet for me is, do you believe that people will still be talking about these 25 years from now? My answer is yes, I do. And to me, if your answer to that is yes, I do, then you should buy, and the price is irrelevant, right? Now, whether you trade ETH for that or fiat for that, I would make, I can make an argument for, like, will it, is it levered ETH? Like, okay, I mean, I don't know. I think anybody who tells you they know is full of shit. Anybody who tells you they know they can see past 6 months is full of shit. You don't know. You have to go on gut instinct and belief. But I bought a second. I also own 6621, which is really my wife's punk. And that's the photo that you should use, is the one of she and I, with the punk heads. Yeah. I don't know if I should tell the story of how I got that one. The way it happened, I don't know if this person wants to be named or not. I don't think it matters, because that's how I found him. It was really just like, I showed my wife Punks on Sale, and she went, that one, that's me. And I sort of laughed, and I clicked on it, and I was like, I think Adam Lindemann owns this. All right. And again, I know Adam Lindemann through Mike D. And I was like, hey, Adam, is this yours? And he's like, oh, yeah, it is. I'm like, why don't we do a deal here? He's like, okay. So that's how we ended up with those two. I hope those people don't mind me telling those two stories. It's on chain, so
yeah. If it's on chain, I think people will find it anyway.
Yeah, I don't think I'm doing any wrong here.
Yeah, so just for the listeners, 6621 is a beautiful tassel hat with cigarettes and red lipstick. Really clean looking punk as well. I really just love the story that this was actually a Tony Herrera punk. I mean, I had Tony on PunkCast a while back as well. And it just sounds like he's onboarded so many different people in different ways as well. And I think it's just, the whole punk community just feels like a bit of a connective tissue, all triangulating and circulating together, with Sean Bonner and Tony Herrera now obviously being permanently on chain as a record as part of 4705, which is really cool.
Yeah, well, and also I thanks to Tony, I own the V1 of 4705. I wish I could get my hands on the V1 of 6621, but I don't think it's ever gonna get there. And also, I just want to say, this is it to me. Those two people are cool as hell. Like, people you actually want to hang out with, right? So but this reminds me of .com mania. I'm telling you, San Francisco in 1999 sucked. The people were whack. The parties were whack. Like, and of course, but the point is that you meet gems, right? Like, you end up meeting people like Justin Frankel, Tom Pepper, Rob Lord, like people that are like the greatest human beings I've ever met in my life. And that's our job. It's just like music. You're always looking for the 1%, right? The reality is that 99% of every genre of music sucks. So when people say, like, I love rap or I love country, or like, what are you talking about? Like, no, most of it is terrible, right? And so, I don't care if it's art or if it's NFTs or if it's human beings. Most of it is garbage, right? And so your job is to find the great things, people, music, culture, and I think that's it. That's why it's fun, right? Because you do find people, projects, communities that are way above. It's not because something is a token gated community that it's good, any more than something being a compact disc makes it good. Right. You have to actually, have the sort of qualitative things that make something awesome.
When you spoke about, CryptoPunks being here for 10, 20 years, and you strongly believe that, and I'm assuming that's part of your, I guess, investment thesis into sort of CryptoPunks as well. Like, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think punks are special in that sort of regard, that they're going to be relevant, 10, 20 years from now?
Because human beings are story consuming creatures. Right. I think that was like the main thing I took away from Sapiens, right? That I really believe is that fundamentally we are story consuming creatures, and that this is part of really my kind of bigger thesis. I really believe that you can't separate technology from humanity at any point on the timeline, and fundamentally, whenever you reconnect humanity in a new way, you end up with a different society and a different civilization, and different things become valuable, right? So the printing press was technology that reconnected humanity, and it didn't just make it so that, oh, look, there's more books. It actually changed who could read, right? And it led to religious warfare, and it really fundamentally reshaped society. Industrialization reshaped society, train travel, air travel, automotive travel, the silicon chip, and certainly the internet. I was reading this interesting piece the other night about how 2012 was like this big pivotal moment in societal change, and you can look at a bunch of metrics that point to that in the same way you can look at a bunch of metrics and point to 1971 as a pivotal moment in societal change. And I would argue that 1971 probably had to do with media. On some level, you had this critical mass of media. Television was in enough households and kind of had reached critical mass to really, change and reshape humanity and reshape what was kind of the collective vision of humanity. And I think by 2012, at that point, you've got 7 or so years on social media. You've got 4 or 5 years on smartphones, and kind of a critical mass of technology reshaping the way that human beings are connected, and therefore reshaping humanity. So I think that, again, I come back to Basquiat because I like it as an example. Basquiat is a great story, whether or not you like the art. I mean, it's relatively close to home. Mike D's wife, Tamara Davis, made a great documentary about one of her conversations with Jean-Michel. I mean, he was very much in a circle of friends that's only 1 degree removed, from my circle of friends. At the same time, his life just has, his life and his work have this story that will be retold year after year after year after year, and more people will know that story. So for CryptoPunks, and your question really is like, why CryptoPunks and why not something else? I think, one thing is just supply, right? We know, and Sean has actually documented well, the CryptoPunk supply will decline year after year. It will never go up, and it actually won't stay flat either. It will actually, supply will decline year after year. And I do believe that more and more people will tell the story. Okay, well, they could lose interest in the story, but I think, so why wouldn't they? And I would argue that, CryptoPunks are the Beatles. You'll never have another Beatles. You might have bands that are just as good as the Beatles, just as interesting. They write just as incredible songs. I would argue that David Bowie had a much better and longer run than the Beatles in terms of making, game changing, music year after year after year from 1970 to 1980 and beyond. But there will never be another Beatles, right? The Beatles have also done, and Paul McCartney in particular has done an amazing job of keeping the Beatles relevant. He wasn't afraid to license Rock Band or to do other things he needed to do to keep the band relevant, to license his music to Steve Jobs, to license his music to us and others at Beats Music and Apple Music. So I think that there's ways also that these brands stay relevant, but there will never be a media moment of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show again. It's impossible. Like it can't possibly exist. It's like asking, when will we have 3 channels on television again? We won't. Therefore, there can't be another Beatles. So I think it's the same for CryptoPunks. They set the stage. It's a PFP collection. It's 10,000. It's on chain. It's ownership in a particular way. Like, so whenever you tell that story, you will have to mention CryptoPunks. So, I believe that, digital value is a huge part of the lives of future humans. I believe that, Bitcoin is one of the most significant inventions in the history of humanity, period. And there will ultimately be 21 million Bitcoin. There will never again be 10,000 CryptoPunks. right? So to me, it's very easy to kind of see why CryptoPunks are the Beatles. And the other thing is supply and demand, coming from the luxury business, people really are stuck on the notion of everybody. Oh, everybody will never do that, right? I mean, it's amazing how often you hear it. Like 1999, well, the internet will never work because everybody will never have broadband. 2008, the iPhone will never work. Everybody will never pay $500 for a smartphone, right? And it was Seth Godin who said, you should fine yourself a nickel anytime you use the word everybody. Because A, there's no such thing, and B, it's irrelevant. Imagine if Ben Otto wanted everybody to buy his brands. Like, that's not his desire at all. He wants to sell great product to people who give a shit, like to people who really care a lot. And he knows that is not everybody by definition. You put even Louis Vuitton, people think of Louis Vuitton as a mass market brand. It couldn't be further from the truth. You put the number of Louis Vuitton customers in any given year, even an incredible year like last year, over 8 billion humans, and that is a very, very, very small fraction. So what you need is a market relative, to supply, right? You need demand relative to supply. You don't need everybody to want one. No band goes out and gets everybody. The reality is, if they did, it's like it's an inefficient model anyway, right? Like it's Taylor Swift's mechanism for capturing value is incredibly inefficient on a relative basis, relative to say Beeple. Number of Taylor Swift customers over total revenue is a much smaller fraction than number of Beeple customers over total value.
I love listening to you talk because I'm actually even getting more bullish on punks in general now, but especially in an NFT sort of bear market, right? But I mean, like, how are you sort of rationalizing, I guess, where we are right now, and are you fundamentally still bullish on NFTs and where we go next?
Yes. So I think that what's happened is we've passed the there was this moment when if you just put we're an internet company, now we can IPO. Right. And then even in the early 2000s, if I put, we're a peer-to-peer company, well, then we can raise money. Right. Ask Daniel Ek, ask Travis Kalanick. They both had, quote, peer-to-peer companies in the early to mid 2000s. Right. And now we've passed that point where, we're an NFT. Oh, wow. I guess I'll buy into that. Why not? And I think that's actually a really good thing. There's a great book with a very catchy title. Carlotta Perez wrote, Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. So I'm joking, not that snappy of a title, but it's basically, this is what you always get, right? You get bubbles, and then you get 30 years of sustained growth, because there's a lot of excitement over the potential. Fools rush in, and then you start to see the real potential, right? You start to see what the actual use cases are. And I think we can certainly see that art is a use case. I think generative art is a genuinely new use case that I would say personally, I'm very bullish on generative art, but you have to say that in a way that you might be bullish on art, right? Like I'm also, bullish on collecting photographs, but most of my friends aren't, and collecting art wasn't something that I could afford to do in my 20s or even 30s, really. And it was something I left to Jimmy Iovine. I'd look at his art collection and sort of go, someday. So I don't think it's not for everybody, but there's certainly a use case, and I really love the idea that collecting digital art can be much more for everybody than the kind of art that Jimmy Iovine collected. Like I said, I love that feeling of collecting a piece for $5 on object.com and then getting into a conversation on Twitter with the artist. That reminds me of being at the Cubby Bear in Chicago in 1988 while Youth of Today is playing and Henry Rollins is standing just to my right. It's the same, that same sort of like punk rock feeling. It's not, I wasn't investing in punk rock in those days with my money and hoping for a financial return. I was investing in a community and hoping for a personal return. And so I'm very bullish on that overall. I do think though that to me there's no question that digital assets are a part of every person's life, just like, credit cards are a part of their life today. I think ultimately ultimately when you tap to pay, the Visa system is not taking, somewhere between 1.5 and 3%. I think that, I spent my morning today at the US Embassy here in Paris to get an incredibly inefficient and insecure form, way to move borders, a piece of paper with my photo on it, which is really poor technology for moving borders. Ultimately that will be a digital asset, and the way that I move borders, I will prove that I am, the owner of the wallet that contains that asset. There's no question. And, just like today, I prove that I'm a member of a community by, everything from, showing a Soho House card to, wearing a t-shirt. Depends on like what community and what the price of entry is, right? All of that will be sort of on chain in our digital lives in the future. So I think all of these use cases are incredibly real. And I would go as far as to say that I personally believe that, fully 50% of all luxury purchases 20 years from now will be digital. I think it only makes sense, right? Because, nobody buys a luxury watch to tell the time, right? So I always use this example. If I say to you, if you say, why did you spend $5,000 for that? And I say, well, I really appreciate the craft. I like the aesthetics. And I want to be a part of the small group of people who identify as, collectors of that. It's unclear if I'm describing a wristwatch or an NFT. I would use the same thing to describe a Rolex, as a Ganbrud, right? Or as a one-on-one from a number of as a Grant Yun. Right. So as a DK, like, I could use exactly the same words to describe an Audemars Piguet and a Grant Yun. So I think that, that just makes it inevitable. And we live digital lives, and, we have identity, and our identity will be digital. If you look at, I have a friend, again, I'm not sure if he'd want to be outed for this, but if I wish I could tell you who he is, but he said that basically the core human needs are eat, sleep, fuck, and flex on your neighbor, right? He's somebody that is. It's interesting to have those words come out of his mouth. I'm just not sure if he'd want me to attribute them to him or not. So, if you're listening, I'm sorry that I didn't credit you if you wanted to be credited, but it's safer this way. And but the reality is, like, as Clayton Christensen, who really wrote kind of he was a Harvard Business School professor who wrote some of the smartest words about innovation, said, there are no new human needs, right? So I think a lot of times we make this mistake of thinking, we're new humans, so we have new needs, but that's not true. 70,000 years, there are no new human needs. We still just want to eat, sleep, fuck, and flex on our neighbor. And so we just hired new technologies to solve these old problems. And certainly, these technologies will be adopted to solve these problems. So I don't think, again, like, people who buy an NFT because it's an NFT, that's like, buying compact disc because it's a compact disc. Makes zero sense. And so, at the same time, like, the laws of supply and demand will hold in a digital world the same way they do in a physical world. And the value of a Basquiat is not the value of the wood and the paint. It's the value of the story and the scarcity, and the scarcity relative to the demand. That's it. And those fundamentals will exist. They will exist and not exist in the digital world the same way they do in the physical world. The reality is that most wood and paint is not that valuable, right? So, the few times that it is will actually be the remarkable ones. And that's the way you have to think about it. If you think, a final word on this, because I think it's important. I actually think that this notion that NFTs are valuable is what holds back the conversation. Because it's not because they're NFTs that they're valuable in any case. And actually, NFTs are probably, as a technology, it's probably more like plastic than it is like gold. Right. So when my mom was born, there was very little plastic in the world. And now if you look left and right, in your house, you're just going to see plastic everywhere. I think NFTs or digital scarcity will probably be the same way, right? If right now, when I was born, there were no NFTs in the world, and I'm sure that 50 years from now, if I look left and right, I'm going to see NFTs everywhere, and most of them will be garbage, like literally space trash. But just like with many other things, I mean, if that plastic was made by Damien Hirst, well, it has a different value than if it was made by Google Gang. So there it is.
Gotcha. Wonderful insights, Ian. Really appreciated you describing all of that. And just, I know we're sort of quick on time, but if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that for you?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I'm deep enough in the community to to really say. I think the thing that draws me to it is it's a group of people who have a deep belief very early and have built a community around that belief. I think probably they believe broadly in the theses that I just put out there, and maybe in different ways, and they came to it in different ways and their own ways. But I think that what has been amazing about it is the way that it is this sort of organic community that really takes care of itself and of each other. I think it makes sense to me, right? It does remind me of punk rock community in that way. Well, in the same way too that I'm sure it's highly varied, right? And some people will probably, get haircuts and real jobs later in life, and some of us won't. But I think that, they're definitely, people who are in some way, on the fringe of culture with deep idealistic beliefs, and they recognize other people who do that. And I think also, I think it is probably, I see it personally as more organic than some of the other kind of membership cultures. I was just talking to someone about this earlier today. I can't really point to a for-pay membership community that you really want to be a part of long term. Soho House has done a great job, and I don't. But they're really more of like it's a hotel community in a way, right? It's a club community. I think that real communities are organic in the way that say you might be a fan of a record label. And there's certainly a community around that, but it's really earned by a lot of consistency. No one started out loving the record label. They started out kind of loving what came out, and then after a long period of time, they built trust in the community that they became a part of. So I think that there's. I really hope. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves. Over time. There's certainly dystopian views of the future that I can't help but wonder, are these like, feudal lords at some point in some dystopian future. But, for me, it's much more of that organic community of like-minded people, who can look at each other and say, yeah, we were there then. It's interesting because we have that in other parts of our lives, right? Like, there's certainly some records I own that show that I was there then, or some photographs that Glenn Friedman has that shows that, he was there then, or, but then this is sort of a different way of, showing and expressing that early belief. And maybe one that has an ROI, which would be that would be an innovation, oddly. It also adds like a scary kind of toxic element. But, let's see how it plays out.
Totally. And if you had to look across the punk community, would you have any favorite punk personalities that come to mind?
Well, I think the ones that we've already talked about. Like also, obviously Novo, and I think, look, I've spent a lot of time with G and with G Money, and I think that what he has done with that. I love that he's taken kind of his punk personality and parlayed it into a couple of other things. And I think that's where, for me, I almost, that's why, my punk is not, my avatar on Twitter, because it's almost too obvious in a way, right? Like it's, also like I just, it's interesting for me because I thought about it a lot, and sometimes I think I'll go there, but I have a hard time with belonging. You know, I like, you know, I've never, I guess, you know, even like I said, with, I never want to be all in on one thing. I want to be critical of the spectrum. In other words, like, you know, I love, like, again, I dislike 99% of all music. I don't love one genre. So, you know, I think it's to me, it's the same thing. Like, it comes down to the individual, right? Like, you got to sit with the individual, and, you know, is it a real person with whose ideals you respond to? Like, I would never, you know, I would never judge a book by its cover, you know, positively or negatively, I guess, or I would try not to, at least.
Gotcha. Unless they've got stringy hair or some of those traits.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your Punk4705, what would you like to say to them?
Well, hopefully that owner is my daughter's, so that's what colors the conversation. So, to say something general, though, is to just say that, you know, follow your instincts, you know, stay idealistic, and follow the frontier, you know, but be careful out there because it's fucking dangerous.
Amazing. Ian, thank you so much for joining PunkCast. Really enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot from today. You know, and really, really delighted to have you part of the CryptoPunk community. Any sort of final closing comments from your side, and, you know, what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, just thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here, be a part of the community. You know, thanks for everyone. It's been really, really kind to me. Coming a little late to the party. You come late to the party, you know, it's not, you know, not everybody. Some people might be too drunk to be nice, but people have been super nice to me at this party. So thank you. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, Twitter is a good way. You can at me there. IANCR. None of the other inboxes go to zero. So, you know, do that, or you can hit me, you know, CryptoPunks group on Telegram, you know, or hit up Sean or Tony. They know how to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ian, and all the best. And thanks you for your time. Guys, that wraps up another episode of PunkCast for the week. And we'll be back next week with another punk. Bye for now.